The sun was sinking low over the endless plains, turning the horizon into a wash of molten copper and fading violet as rancher Eli McGraw guided his tired mare toward the crooked fence that marked the edge of his land, his eyes narrowed against the dusty wind that carried both the scent of cattle and the faint cries of coyotes, waking for the hunt. And though Eli was a man accustomed to silence and solitude after years of burying, more than he ever dared to count his parents in a fever, his younger brother in the war, and a sweetheart who had run off with a gambler to Dodge City, this evening was different. For from the shadows near his weather-beaten barn came a sound no man expects to hear in the dying light, the trembling whisper of a woman, faint and desperate, carried like a ghost across the dry earth. And when he turned in the saddle, his hand instinctively dropped to the worn grip of the Colt at his side. But what he saw was not an outlaw or a thief, but a figure crumpled against the boards of the barn, ragged and shaking, her dress torn at the seams and her face hidden beneath a tangle of dust-caked hair, her hands clutching the ground as though the very earth might swallow her whole. And when Eli swung down from his horse and approached, slow and wary, her voice broke again with a plea so raw it seemed to tear the air itself. "Please, don't look at me," she begged, her tone like a prayer dragged through broken glass. And for a long moment Eli stood frozen, the wind tugging at his coat, his heart caught in the cage of his chest, for he had seen fear in the eyes of dying men and women alike, but never had he heard shame so heavy it demanded blindness. Yet his soul stubborn as the land itself could not obey. And though she covered her face with her hands and turned away, his gaze lifted and met the truth she tried to bury. A face scarred and brutalized as if the cruelty of men had carved itself into her skin with fire and knife, her left cheek melted into ridges, her lips torn at one corner, her eye clouded with a milky haze. And Eli McGraw, who had buried dreams beneath dry dirt, who had walked through war and famine, felt the blood in his veins turn to ice. Not from disgust, but from the sheer injustice that stared back at him. And as his mare stamped the ground and the prairie darkened into night, he realized this woman was not some beggar lost to madness, but someone hunted, someone who had once been whole, someone broken by hands too cruel for the world to forgive. And when she tried to crawl away into the dust, whispering, I'll go, just don't see me," Eli knelt beside her, his shadow falling over her like a cloak. And though he wanted to speak, to ask who had done this, to demand answers, he could only say in a voice thick with something he had not felt in years, "Ma'am, you don't need to run." Yet she shook her head violently, clawing at the ground, her sobs raw. And in that moment Eli knew his life had shifted like the turning of the wind. For whatever had happened to this woman had followed her here, and whether he liked it or not, the ghosts that scarred her face would soon ride across his land as well. The night came heavy and silent, the kind of silence that makes a man feel every creak of timber in his bones. And inside Ellie's ranch house the woman who gave no name, and would not meet his eyes, sat wrapped in a coarse wool blanket before the dying fire, her shoulders drawn tight as if even warmth were an enemy. And Eli moved about the room with the awkward care of a man who knew cattle better than people, brewing coffee black as tar and setting it on the table, his gaze drifting again and again to the shadowed hollow of her scarred face, not from pity, but from the gnawing sense that her presence was a warning carried on the wind. And at last, when the crackle of the fire was the only sound between them, she whispered, "You shouldn't have looked," her voice barely a thread. And when Eli said nothing, she went on, the words breaking like brittle sticks. "They said if anyone saw me, if anyone knew, they'd come back and finish it." And Eli felt his jaw tighten, his fists clench, for he knew the kind of men who carved fear into flesh: raiders, deserters, outlaws who thrived on cruelty, men who left scars not just on bodies but on the land itself. And though she shook her head, refusing his offer of food, refusing even his questions, at last her story spilled like blood from a wound. She had been taken from a wagon train weeks back, held by men who called themselves brothers of the Black Mesa Gang, men who lit fires for fun and marked their victims as trophies. And when she refused to serve them, they had burned her, carved her, and left her for dead. But she had crawled through canyon and sandstorm until the stars carried her to Ellie's ranch And now, with every breath, she feared they were coming to claim her silence forever. And though Eli had faced danger before, something in her voice stirred a rage he had buried beneath years of dust. For this was no stranger's fight anymore. This was his land, his fire, his choice. And when she begged him again with a shaking hand, "Please, don't fight them. They'll kill you too," Eli only set his jaw and laid his rifle across the table, the firelight gleaming along its barrel like a promise, and said low and steady, "If they come, they'll find I'm not easy meat." And though her eyes filled with tears, though she tried to shrink deeper into the blanket, Eli knew that whatever storm was gathering on the horizon, he would not turn away. For the Wild West was a place that tested a man's soul, and he had spent too long letting the world strip him of purpose. And now, in the scarred stranger's plea, he had found something worth standing for, something worth fighting for, even if it cost his blood. And as the coyotes sang outside and the wind pressed against the shuttered windows, Eli McGraw lonely, rancher, scarred by life in ways no one could see, looked across the fire at the broken woman who had stumbled into his world and whispered not for her but for himself, "They won't take you, not while I'm still breathing." And though the night pressed on heavy, though the threat was as certain as sunrise, for the first time in years his heart beat with something more than survival. It beat with defiance, and with it the promise of redemption.